Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at day 2, the second and final day of the Casablanca variant of Casablanca chess event, which is being held here in Morocco. So without further ado, let's jump right into the action. Now, obviously with this variant, we start with positions from games. Most of these games have been picked by the audience or commentators who are very strong at the game of chess. But one of the great things about this Casablanca variant is we are playing historical games. So the great tradition and history of chess does carry over. All right, so the game we're going to start with is the first game of the day. I'm playing with the black piece against Amin Bassem from the African continent, the strongest player from Africa. He has been 2,700 before, and he is someone who has beaten me in past classical games. Now, he's also someone that I've known for a very, very long time, as the first time that Amin Bassem and I competed against each other was 27 years ago in the great event, the World Youth Chess Festival, held in 1997 in Cannes, France. Now, that game of Queen upon Endgame, which I lost, I still have memories of that game. So anyway, long story short, we're starting off second day of Casablanca chess, and we have a set position, as I've mentioned before, which comes out of the French defense. So we get this position out of the Winnower with takes, queen g4, knight f6 takes, rook g8, queen h6, and now the move c5 being played. Now, one thing that's great about this, since I have enabled the game review, is that you will see that all these moves are book moves. This is known theory. That being said, of course, it's a position that we have not studied for a very, very long time. In fact, I'm not even sure when the last time I looked at this variation was. Nonetheless, the one thing that I do remember about this variation is that there are some games that were played by the famous first American World Chess Champion, Bobby Fischer. Now, I don't remember the exact games, but I do remember this position being played, and the one thing that I recall from it is that what the correct move for white here is this move, knight e2. Now, Amin in the game decides to take this pawn on c5, which is completely playable, but is not the top move. In the game between Vichy Anand and Magnus Carlsen, Vichy might be 54, 55 years old, but he did actually play the correct move, knight to e2, showing why he is such a legend and a great 5-time world chess champion. All right, so Amin takes on c5. I play rook g6 here. We get queen to e3, and now I go queen a5. Now, temporarily, white is ahead by one pawn. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and black is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So white has one extra pawn. Or probably I should count in French, since obviously everybody in Morocco does speak the French language. So anyway, I'm down a pawn here, and temporarily, it looks like white should be better. Even though the pawns are stacked, white also has the bishop pair. On the other hand, white is lacking severely in development. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces on their original squares to begin with. So I played, so in this position, after queen a5, we get rook to b1, and now I play knight bd7, trying to go after this pawn on c5. Here, Amin plays knight e2, and now I take on c5. Now already, you can tell from the valuation that black is a little bit better here, as white has lost the extra pawn, and he's still way behind in development, with these 4 pieces not having moved yet. So Amin trades the queens, and now he goes bishop e3. I play the move b6, and he plays knight f4. Now, knight f4 is simply a bad move, as we will see in the game. What Amin should have gone for was this move knight g3, or even taking on c5 and then playing knight g3, because his pawn at e4 is always under pressure, and white simply aims to move the bishop castle, put a rook on e1, something like, let's say, a6, bishop c4. I'm just going to illustrate the point here. And after rook e1, suddenly this pawn on e4 is under massive pressure here. The white rook on b1 also controls the b file, and white should be better. So, Amin should have either traded on c5 or gone knight g3 here, and in this case, white has no issues whatsoever. Instead, Amin plays knight f4, I go rook g8, and now he decides to play the move bishop b5 check. Here I have to play bishop d7. If I go king e7, white can trade the bishop for the knight, and after bishop c6, it's uh-oh spaghetti-o time, as I'm simply going to lose the rook in the corner pocket. So I go bishop d7, we get the trade of the bishop for the knight, the bishops come off, and now castle is played by Bassem. The big problem in this position for white is this knight on f4. If you could magically say reset this knight here on g3, white would be completely fine as the knight is pressuring the pawn. But in this position here, with the knight on f4, the knight is actually a big target because of e5, and I can also aim to play f5 and create a diamond hands formation with the pawns in the center of the board. So we get castles, I go king e7, Amin plays rook e1, and now I go for this move rook a b8. Now the material is even here, both sides have 6 pawns. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and black also has 6 pawns as well, so it's even material. But white has double pawns on c2 and c3, which are very weak, and I can always guard my double pawns on e4 and e6 with the move f5 here. So we get rook b3 played. Of course, if white were to trade the rooks and go rook takes e4, there is a classic ice skater checkmate with rook b1, rook e1, and rook takes rook, and the king simply has no squares available. So in this position, after rook b8, we get rook b3. I now play the move f5, creating the pawn formation with the 3 pawns. We have f3, and now I go knight to f6 here, intending to recapture with the knight on e4. Here we get king f2, and now I go e5, kicking the horse out of the center, and with his knight on f6, not only does it guard the pawn on e4, but it also stops white from moving the knight to the d5 square. So we have knight h3 being played, and now I play this move rook b6. Computer apparently wants rook b to d8, going for the classic kebab, with rook d8 to d2, going after all the pieces on the second rank. Nonetheless, I play rook b6, we get the move c4 played, and now I play rook d6. Once again, computer prefers this move rook to d8, claiming the d file, all the while not letting white infiltrate with rook b7. Instead, I play rook d6, we have rook b7, king e6, and now this move g3 is played, and here I go rook a6. Now at this point, I was way up on time on the clock, so I was trying to just find moves to keep the game going, but I start making some inaccuracies. Amin plays f4, and now I play this move knight g4, we get king g2, and here I play this move rook d8, which is simply a blunder. Now I was actually very concerned in the game with this move king to e2, because what it does is it stops me from ever infiltrating on the d file here as the king covers the squares, and I wasn't sure how I was going to proceed. But Amin being very low on time, he plays the move king g2, and now I play rook d8. Now once again, I probably should have gone either rook d6 or rook takes a3, which would have been better options. Instead, I play rook d8. We get rook to e2 here being played fairly quickly. This is a mistake, as knight g5 would have saved the game for Amin, because after king f6 and h3 tickling the knight on g4, I have no squares available. Now, at first glance, it looks really scary because there's rook d2, checking the king, but after king g1, let's say I go rook takes a3, for example here, white actually is a forced draw with knight takes pawn. If I go this way to g6, there's knight to f8. If I go to h6, rook h7 would be the classic Arabian checkmate here, as the king has no squares available. If I go to h5, for example, white can take, and after king g4, rook g7, let's say king to h3. Once again, it looks very scary here, but after check, takes, check, king h3, white can now take on e5. There are no checks on g3 or g2, and white is pushing p with e6, e7, and e8 to try and win the game. So this would have been one way to save the game. Also, actually, I should point out here, if we get this position, if I try to go to e6, check, and run the king this way to d6, now white has rook d7 check, winning the rook on d2, and with it, the game as well. So Amin instead plays move rook to e2, missing his chance here, and now I take the pawn on a3. We get knight g5, king f6, and the move h4 is played. Now, if white were to play h3 here, the reason the position is a little bit different is that I can go knight to e3 here. And if white moves the king to, let's just say, f2, I can take on f4, let's say takes, and now I can even go knight takes c4 here, and I'm simply quite a bit better. Additionally, the other big difference here, just to illustrate the point, is that even if I were to take on c4 and white goes knight h7, after king g6, there's no f8 square available here for the knight to check the king, and the only way for the knight to go is back to g5. So all those ideas which involved rook d2, which were a draw, was specifically because the rook was not on the 8th rank covering this f8 square. So Amin very low on time here. He plays this move h4, and this does kind of lose the game because now I take on f4, we get the swap, and I play this move h6, tickling the knight on g5. And now if knight h7, king g6, the knight is simply stuck here. There are no squares available for it to return home, and the f8 square is covered by the rook as well. So Amin goes rook f7, I play king g6, here he goes h5, takes knight e6, and now I find a very nice idea with this move rook to d1 here, because if white were to capture the pawn on f5, now there's a move king to h4, and suddenly the white king is stuck in a mating net, as I'm simply going to go rook g3 and checkmate the king. Now white could sack a rook and prolong the game, but white would lose, and after rook c5, rook to g3 check, the king has no squares available. All of the squares are covered by the rooks and the knight on g4. So Amin goes knight to g7 here. I play king g6. He goes rook c7. And now I, again, show a mating net with knight e3. We get king h2, knight f1, king g2. Not back to the first rank, because then there's knight g3, winning the rook on e2. So he goes king g2. I play rook g3. King h1 played here. And now I play rook h3. We get king g1. And after knight to e3, Amin Bassem resigns the game, because after king to f2 here, there's rook to f3, which would simply be checkmate. King has no squares available once again. So I win the first game of the day in a very nice, smooth fashion. Again, I will say that I feel like in this situation, Vichy, myself, and Magus, we've played the French opening. Amin Bassem is somebody who has not, I think, ever played the French in his life with the black pieces. And I think with the white pieces, he doesn't play these systems. So for Bassem, he was in very unfamiliar territory, which probably led to his early decisions, leading to a bad position. And I definitely took advantage of that as I won the first game of the day. Now, Magus would draw his first game of the day against Vichy Anand. Vichy showing just his amazing skills and level at the age that he's at. In the second game, Magnus would win against Bassem. I was very close to winning against Vichy, but I sort of let it slip through my fingers at some critical moments. The game would be a draw, which sets us up for the final round game. Now, in the final round, I'm playing with the black pieces against Magnus Carlsen. He's leading by 1 point, but one of the best things about the scenario is that on top of it being a must-win situation, this is an exhibition in a sense. So what I mean by this being an exhibition is that in this situation, if I go all in and I lose, it's not going to affect the rating, it's not going to affect prize money or anything else, so I have free reign to try and go insane. But on the flip side of that, you guys, is the fact that at the end of the day, we players get to choose the final position. So there were 3 options of positions. One was an Ali Ekins defense, one was a Queen's Gambit decline with opposite side king castling, and this was the third position, which I actually selected because I needed something double-edged. So we'll get right into the action. This opening was a classic rouser system here, or classical Sicilian. We end up in a position which is very, very well known here. You'll see that it says book with this position after the move f5. Now, one of the interesting things is that both Vichy Anand and Magnus Carlsen, or the white pieces, selected this position. Amin Bassem selected one of the other positions, but I chose this position because even though I think it's easier for white to play, and I actually think white is a little bit better here, is that black has some advantages. Black in the long run has the 2 Bs here on e7 and d7. There's some options to try and attack on the queen side, and if white is not super precise, I think black would be better. So, Vichy and Magus thought white was probably a little bit better. They selected this, and then I selected this as well, which led to this being the position we actually had. So the game starts here in this position after f5, and Magnus plays the move g4. Now, keep in mind, I wasn't 100% sure what the game was, but the classical slash rouser Sicilian was a very popular system in the 90s, and I actually thought this was probably some Kasparov Kramnik type game from that era. As it turns out, it was a game that was played in a Women's World Championship match, but nonetheless, the position is very, very rich and full of possibilities. So Magnus goes g4 here, trying to attack, and I really like this move here because what Magnus understands is that even though black has the 2 bishops here, if white can open up the position, it's going to be very hard to castle the king. I push the pawns on the queen side, so castling looks a little bit loose. Castling on the king side looks completely insane as white can play g4 or queen g3, trying to attack immediately. So Magnus goes g4. I take the pawn, he plays h3, and now I take on h3. Now, one of the great things about this opening as well is that I'm in a situation where my moves are very straightforward. I really don't have options. If I don't take this pawn on g4, let's say I go rook c8 after takes. If I take back, I lose the pawn in the center of the board, and I get destroyed on the spot. So I have to take. He goes h3. Well, once again, I have to take. If I play a move like g3 here, I think white can play a move like knight to e2, or even queen takes g3, followed by knight e2, knight e4, and queen g7. And once again, I simply think that white is much better. So I grab the free juicer. Magnus takes with the rook. I play queen c7, and here he finds another very, very precise move, which is this move queen to g1, trying to infiltrate with queen g7 on the 7th rank. Now, the reason this move is so good is that here you're probably thinking, well, what's the big deal? Just castle to the queen side. But if I castle to the queen side, suddenly here I'm actually in a lot of trouble as white can sack the knight with knight takes pawn. And if I take back with the pawn, suddenly the rook swings all the way over to the c3 square, going after the queen on c7. Now, the funny thing is, after takes, and king b7, black is probably still kind of okay here, but in a must-win situation, this is not what I'm hoping for. One other sample line is if I go bishop c6 here, white can sack the bishop, I take, and after takes, you're thinking, wait, you've got a rook and 2 b's for the queen, so you're very much in the game. But white has queen to a7, checking the king. I move the king, takes the bishop, and I resign the game immediately. So after queen g1, I play the move b4 here. Magnus goes queen g7, and now I play the move rook f8. Now, castles is maybe a possibility here, but after queen f7, attacking the bishop, the pawn on a6 hanging as well, it simply feels very difficult to play. So I go rook f8. Magnus goes knight e2, and now I play this move rook c8. Now, after the game, Magnus and I briefly discussed the possibility of castling to the queen side. The reason I rejected this line is that if for no other reason that white can go knight d4, let's say king b7, and after queen h7, material is balanced, but more importantly, on top of material being balanced here, I don't have an easy way to break with f6 as the e6 pawn is loose. White can go queen d3, rook b3, c3, and there's all kinds of pressure on the queen side here, and I didn't see any chances to win the game. So that's why I played rook c8 here, trying to target the pawn on the c2 square. Magnus goes knight d4, and now I play the move bishop c5. Here, Magnus plays queen takes h7. I take the knight, and white is able to recapture as the queen guards the pawn on c2. After rook takes d4, I play queen c5. Magnus goes rook d1, and here I blunder with the move queen to f2. Now, the computer says that I can simply play the move a5 here, guarding the pawn on b4, with the idea of pushing a4 and a3. Probably this is very close to equal, because after rook g3, a4, and rook g8 here, white is simply going to be forcing the rooks off the board, and unless there's some idea like a lolly idea with like a3, b3, and queen c3 here, it's simply not possible to win the game. Nonetheless, this is what I should have done. But at this point, I'm in full-on mode trying to win the game, so I go for this move queen f2, trying to pressure the pawns on f4 and c2. Now, Magnus correctly takes the pawn on a6, and I play the move rook a8. Now, another reason I play this line is that even though black is down a pawn here, if white moves the bishop away to, say, d3, suddenly there's queen to a7 here, putting all kinds of pressure on the a file, and now white's king is actually very vulnerable on the b1 or c1 square. But Magnus being Magnus, of course, after rook a8, he finds the absolute best move, which is queen to g7, and now I have to play this move bishop c6. If I take the free bishop here on a6, white is rook to h8. If I trade the rooks after takes, here check, king e8, white can now go rook to h1. White is infiltrating on the h file here. Maybe there's some way to keep the game going after bishop a4, but optically it looks like it's completely lost here in this position after rook h8. Now, I guess after bishop a4 and b3, there's some queen a7 move, which I don't understand at all, because I think after check, king d7 and queen f7, king c6 and takes, I assume white is winning, although apparently after king c5, the game goes on. White's supposed to play queen g6, and he's winning, but this is just simply computer chess and not realistic in a human game. So, in this position after queen g7, knowing that there's this rook h8 idea, I don't take, actually I'll add one more line in here, which is if I play the move queen c5, guarding the rook on f8 here, now white goes rook to h1 here. And if I trade the rooks, white is simply checkmating very quickly with queen to f6. And if I don't trade the rooks, and let's say I play rook c6 after takes, and rook to h8, white wins the queen and the game as well. So I play bishop c6, and now Magnus plays the move rook h8, and I go rook takes rook. Now, after the game, Vichy very briefly spoke to us, and he mentioned the line that is winning for white here, which is extremely counterintuitive, especially in a blitz game, which is to play the very quiet move bishop to f1. Now, the reason bishop d3 wasn't great is because after queen a7, you lose the pawn on a2, but after bishop to f1 here, if I go queen a7 now, white can play the move a3 as the rook will swing over and capture the pawn on a3. And if I go queen to f4 here, now white can play the move bishop to d3 with the idea of rook to f1 as well as rook h8. And unlike in the previous position, now the queen can't go back to a7 here to hit the pawn on a2. So white is much better, if not winning. Now, again, in a blitz game, very, very unrealistic to expect that to happen, but it's still a beautiful variation, which shows how strong computers are. So Magnus goes rook h8. I trade the rooks, and here I play king d7, and now he goes queen to f6, and I snap the bishop on a6. Now, temporarily, black has an extra bishop, but unfortunately, I'm losing all my pawns here on f7 and e6, and my king is also very, very weak on d7. Now, here I play the move king c8, which is apparently a mistake. I was supposed to go king d8 here, but after queen takes e6, queen takes f4, for example, there's check, king here, and I think there's rook takes d5, and at the very least, white can never be worse, simply because if I check, there's rook to d1 blocking the back rank checkmate. And if I take, after takes, bishop b7 here, white can go queen e6, let's just say king to b8, queen d6, king a8, and at the very least, white always is a3 here. And even if we get some position like this, for example, where I'm able to win the pawn, queen and bishop versus a queen is simply a draw, even if you remove the two pawns on c2 and b2. So white never runs any risk of losing. So I go king c8 instead. Magnus takes on e6, king b7, check, and now I play the move king a8. And here, Magnus forces a draw by repetition with queen to f8, king a7, and queen to e7. Now, of course, in this position, I could try and block with the bishop on b7, but after queen takes b4 here, white simply has 1, 2, 3, 4, white has 4 extra pawns in return for the bishop, and white can never lose the game. Now, black probably is in no danger of losing either, but the only person who has any chance is white, and otherwise it will be a draw. So, the reason that Magnus actually forced the repetition here instead of taking the pawn on b4 right away is with the bishop on c6 versus b7. Now I can play this move rook to a4, and after queen d6, rook c4, suddenly I have some pressure on the c file. The f4 pawn is falling. Again, white should run no risk of losing, but why do you want to allow this? And on top of that, a draw simply ensures that Magnus Carlsen will win the event. So Magnus basically forces the repetition here, and the game ends in a draw. Very peaceful game, but it was not without drama, and it was a very exciting game, I think, from start to finish. With the draw, that means that Magnus Carlsen does win the first edition of the Casablanca chess tournament here, being held in Casablanca, Morocco. He played great chess from start to finish. He wins by 1 point. I would say for myself, this was a bit of an exhibition, but I'm both happy and unhappy. I'm happy from the standpoint that I'm very happy with sort of the variety of the positions, the creativity that was possible from the get-go. I'm a little bit unhappy with some of my choices in the two of the 3 games today against Bassem and Bassem and Vishy Anand, because I felt that I wasn't super sharp. So it's sort of a little bit of wake-up call that I need to be a little bit sharper when I start playing in Norway chess next week. But overall, I enjoyed the event immensely. I think this variant actually is my current favorite. Far surpassing Fischer Random at the moment, simply because even though we ended up in fresh positions, it's still classical chess. It's still based around the history of what chess has been for the last 600 plus years. And frankly, the games are just really, really creative. So I actually enjoy this a lot. I would say, frankly, this is my current favorite ahead of Fischer Random. And I do hope there are more events like this in the future, whether it's here in Casablanca or elsewhere in the world, because I found it just very fascinating and really, really enjoyable from start to finish. So, on that note, you guys, unfortunately, this event here in Casablanca was only 2 days. I really wish there were more games and more recaps to come, but at the end of the day, it is what it is. So, end of the day, fun event here in Morocco. I had a great time. Big shout, of course, to all the people here who are really, really friendly, really, really nice. The whole environment was just so friendly and great. So many fans asked for autographs and pictures, and I enjoyed it immensely. So one of the best trips in recent memory for me when I think about chess events that I compete at. So great time, had a blast, and that's going to be it. So on that note, I hope you guys enjoyed this recap. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we'll be back soon with some more great recaps from Norway chess, which starts next week. See you guys. Have a great one. Bye.